Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Here in India, it's past 8 p.m. So this is an indication of our pandemic times, working in different time zones. But we are so excited to have this discussion with all of you from Latin America. Welcome to the Global Dialogues on Community Media in the Post-Pandemic World, hosted by the UNESCO Chair on Community Media, based in University of Hyderabad, India. In the final episode of the series, episode 11 today, we are turning to Latin America, where it all began more than half a century ago. In June this year, the UNESCO Chair on Community Media, with the support of the UNESCO Regional Office in New Delhi, started a series of dialogues with community radio broadcasters, policy advocates, and activists from various regions of the world, including South Asia, Australia, the UK and Ireland, Eastern and Southern Africa, Western and Central Africa, Southeast Asia and the Pacific, continental Europe, and North America. These participants have been sharing their experiences and insights on the role played by community media, especially community radio, in their respective regions. No history of community media would be complete without the inspiring beginnings of community radio in the Bolivian coal mines way back in the 1940s, and the exciting trajectory of people-managed, citizen-controlled media across Latin America since then. Through revolutions and liberation struggles, violent conflicts, political instability, and fights against poverty and deep inequalities, community media initiatives in Latin America have stood up for peace building, social change and justice, and the rights of indigenous peoples. They have always spoken for the truly marginalized people of their countries. My personal experience with Latin American community media was in Colombia on the sidelines of the IMCR conference in Cartagena, organized by my friend Amparo Cadavid in July 2017. The highlight of that trip for me was the unforgettable tour of the Montes de Maria region of Colombia, led by Rodríguez, whose book, Citizens Media Against Armed Conflict, Disrupting Violence in Colombia, was actually my introduction to community radio in the country. It was a truly amazing visit, seeing and listening to stories of a number of initiatives where ordinary citizens in rural areas came out into public spaces to reweave the threads of community solidarity and peace that were destroyed by decades of violence. Many such examples from all across Latin America that have been sources of inspiration to activists and academics interested in community and citizens media around the world. We have today a very distinguished panel of experts from the region to discuss community media in Latin America, especially against the context of the pandemic. I'm delighted to see my old friend, Alfonso Gumucio-Dagron, whose published work in the 1990s really connected me for life to community media and social change, joining today's discussion, along with other leading and eminent interlocutors for community media in the region, including people like María Matta, who was the global head of AMARC. You will hear a little more about each of them shortly from the moderators. Leading today's dialogue are my good friends and colleagues from the Community Communication section of IAMCR, the International Association for Media and Communication Research, Andrea Medrado and Claudia Magallanes Blanco, who readily responded to my request to moderate this discussion. Claudia is a professor of the Humanities Department of the Universidad Iberoamericana Puebla in Mexico. She is also an activist working with community and indigenous media and communication collectives in Mexico. Amongst her research areas are community and indigenous communication, communication for social change, social movements, media, and communication. Many of you may know her 2008 book on the use of video for political consciousness raising in Mexico that looked particularly at independent videos made about the Zapatistas. Andrea Medrado currently teaches at the School of Media and Communication of the University of Westminster. Prior to this, she worked as a faculty at the Social Communication Department of Federal Fluminense University, UFF, Brazil. She worked as a co-investigator for the eVoices network, funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in UK, analyzing different uses of digital technologies and artivism, art and activism, to fight marginalization in countries of the Global South. She is currently the Vice President of IIMCR, elected very recently, and we are also proud of Andrea for getting into this position. And she also acted as the co-chair of the Community Communication and Alternative Media section for 4 years, from 2016 to until very recently. I now welcome Claudia and Andrea to introduce the panelists and take this discussion forward. Thank you. Over to Andrea and Claudia.
Hola a todos, buen día.
Hi everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation, VINOD, and for the UNESCO chair for community radio, and also our colleagues from the University of Hyderabad. I'm very happy to be here to participate here in this final episode for Global Dialogues with colleagues and people that I really admire. And also the series really inspired me, and with so many difficulties that we are living, I think it's very important to really enjoy the good things or the few good things that of the life that is Zoomified, and to spend a good time all together. Claudia. Thank you also, VINOD, and for the UNESCO Chair for Communication. I'm very happy to be in this space. When VINOD invited us, Andrea and myself, we answered very quickly that we're very grateful to do a moderation of this panel with all these amazing people that have shared and have brought a lot in the domain of community radio in Latin America. And before we start the panel, for all the people that have added, that have joined this panel is in Spanish, but there is, I'm going to say it in English quickly. So, hi everyone, this is Clementina, I'll be your translator today. If you have chosen the English room, you're supposed to hear me. She's explaining all the logistics of choosing your English room. She's repeating the same thing in Spanish, and we are going to start the discussion. Again, I'm Clementina, and I'll be your translator for today. If you can hear me, then you are in the English translation room. So after this technical announcement, we are going to start with the discussion. Thank you, Claudia. Very important, this technical announcement. And now we are going to introduce our panelists. We are very grateful to have the presence of Monica Valdes, who is a Colombian anthropologist graduated from the National Columbia University and a journalist with a master's degree in communication from Javeriana University. She's currently the vice president of the World Association of Community Radio, AMARC, for Latin America and the Caribbean, organization that works in favor of democratization of communication for rural and urban communities. She has extensive experience in the creation of sound content and designing and implementation of communication strategies for diverse audiences, with a focus on social change and significant contribution to process of historical truths and memory, cultural identity, peace building, and human rights.
En el panel tenemos también.
In the panel, we also have José Manuel Ramos-Rodríguez, who started the development of a state-sponsored indigenous radio network in Mexico 40 years ago. Subsequently, he designed and launched the National Radio Literacy Program for the National Institute for Adult Education. He holds a PhD in social sciences from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and is a member of the National Research System, the official peak body for scientific development in Mexico. He has been a professor and researcher at the Universidad de las Américas Puebla and Universidad Autónoma de Puebla. As an activist, he has accompanied formation and evaluation processes for several indigenous community radio stations. He has published extensively on indigenous radio and indigenous communication since 2017. He is a lecturer at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Puebla, Mexico. And he has also been my professor, and I admire him very much. João Paulo Malerba is a professor, lecturer, journalist, and activist. He holds a PhD in communication and culture from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He is a researcher at the Community Communication Studies Laboratory, LEC, and a member of the World Association of Community Radios, also known as AMARC, in Brazil, where he was national representative, executive coordinator, and political advisor. He is a projects coordinator for CRIAR Brazil, that is a Brazilian NGO that campaigns for the human rights to communication. He is also a lecturer in radio at the Rio de Janeiro State University. And he's also my friend. We also have María Matta Cerna, who is an expert in the area of communication with strategic vision in public policy for communication, with journalism studies at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Specialization also in the areas of freedom of expression and rights, human rights, communication, and community radio broadcasting. Also with vast experience in management of radio media, correspondent also for issues of politics and media. Currently, she serves as coordinator of the program Radio Escuela of the Sub-Department of Culture of the Municipality of Santiago de Chile. She was world president of AMARC between 2010 and 2015, also led the first women's radio of Chile called Radio Earth between 1998 and 2003. And to conclude the presentations, we are very happy to have the presence of Alfonso Gumucio-Dagron. He's a development communication specialist, filmmaker, and writer from Bolivia, with working experience in Africa, Asia, South Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He is the author of various books on film and communication, such as Making Waves, Stories of Participatory Communication for Social Change, and Communication for Social Change Anthology with Thomas Tufte. He worked for 3 decades as development communication advisor and international consultant for the United Nations, bilateral organizations, international NGOs and foundations, and has been the managing director for programs at the Communications for Social Change Consortium. Between 2006 and 2012, he coordinated the communication and social change thematic group at the Latin American Association for Communication Research, ALAIC, and coordinated also various research projects on communication. It's really a pleasure to have you in this panel, and the dynamic that we have established is that we will do a first question that the panelists already know. I'm going to also repeat it so that you know the question, and at the same order that they were presented, they will have 3 minutes to answer this question. After that, we will open the discussion and dialogue, but there will be no specific timing for each. The first country, the first question for which they have they have 3 minutes, is what is the key role of communication in Latin America? Monica, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much for the invitation. VINOD, Kanchan, it was very nice to see you. Monica and Andrea, also, thank you for the moderation and for all the friends and colleagues. It's really a pleasure to say hi to you. And to what in front of the question, the communication is really the voice of resistance and defense of the territory in the polyphony of community and ethnic voices that today defend water, food, sovereignty, local knowledge, collective uses of land, and human rights. This is really the big agenda of community communication. The community communication narrates from what it means today to be a community in an individualistic and materialistic world. It's also the voice of nature in the midst of harmful extractive projects and a development model that is killing the world. And the communication not only for the landscape of the territory, but also from what it says. We value the community sense of the territory, and this is why we say in AMARC that we are local voices with a global reach. What happens in the countryside, in the favelas, in our jungles, has a global reach. It's really the voice of Berta Cáceres in Honduras, of Juana Perea in Colombia, of Mariel Franco in Brazil. And in the words is the voice of the community and all the climate change defenders. And in the words of Bolivian environmental defenders, fighting for territory is fighting for life. Community communication in Latin America has a key role as a space to democratize the word with the opinion of the peoples, with local accents and the diversity of languages, and must be a direct channel for the exercise of their citizenship, with the will of the country, peasant, Black, indigenous workers from the peripheral or marginal country, the country of women and LGBTI people, the country of young people who demand historical memory and non-repetition of dictatorship, wars, exclusion, racism. Thank you very much, Monica. José Manuel? So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's also a pleasure to be in this table, in this panel. Thank you very much. Like we were saying at the beginning, in these times, for some reason that we are more isolated, but at the same time we have this
virtualmente por estas plataformas. Entonces, pues, Gracias por la invitación.
To meet,
Esta pregunta de cuál es el papel
virtual
clave de la
platforms.
comunicación comunitaria en América Latina.
Thank you for the invitation.
Pues yo
In front of this,
suscribo
what is the role of community communication in Latin America? I really agree with what Monica said. Maybe a more abstract level, but not less dense. I think that the community communication, they are not only radio, but they are called to adhere at the voices that here and there and in a lot of fields, they are asking for a deep change in the way that we have relationships between humans with nature, but at a point where I think the proposal is to construct a new project, a new civil project, another type of civilization, different that has been reigning our world for centuries. But so a new civilization that is more horizontal, that is more human. And in our countries, this implies to enter to adventure in this thinking of colonizer,
y pues contribuir
a new way of seeing the
o tal vez a reconstruir o a inventar
and contribute in the construction, or maybe to reconstruct or even invent a different world, a world where there is a lot of worlds. So I think the community media, they have to find a new senses, new ways in the human relations, and to be a starting point of the change. I want to really underline that, in my opinion, the community media, they will have to be added to all these movements, not to think that they're going to be the leaders, but they are going to accompany it. And they have, of course, a very big power to bring people together. So that's why they have a very key, important role. And also to add to what Monica shared, right now, one of its main point is the defense of the territory, and really this voracious activism that is finishing with what is left of natural wealth. But I think that is already entering into the theme on what is their role, and also the conflicts and the movements in Latin America, the social movements. Thank you very much, Pepe, and later we'll enter more in there. João. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with friends, and sorry for my Portuñol. And to make myself understandable, I took notes. I want to start, like VINOD recalled, we can consider Latin America as the cradle of community communication in the world, at least if we consider the first experiences of Latin American community radio in the 40s and the 60s, such as the mining radio in Bolivia Bolivia, or the first Brazilian educational radios of the basic education movement. So these Latin American experiences had in common the initial sustenance of the Catholic Church, the ability to subsequently become autonomous when they are taken up by the communities, effectively putting into practice the liberating pedagogy that underlies their formation, also coinciding. And the first key role that I would like to highlight is the vocation of the community media for autonomy. And these radios were taken over by the communities due to the need to transform them into tools of organization and social mobilization in favor of social justice and democracy. This is because the first decades of community media in Latin America coincide with the democratic collapse in most of the countries of the region. Therefore, these medias were important instruments in the struggle of the return of democracy when they became true schools of citizenship for the poorest and most marginalized sectors of power. And here, the second role that I would like to highlight is the vocation of the community media for democracy and popular participation. And while in the past and in the present, we know that democratic ruptures are only possible with censorship and with the consent of the media. In the case of Brazil, the dictatorship that began in 1964 had the support of a good part of the hegemonic media that were censored or silenced in terms of the demands of the social movements. In this scenario, community media were often the only space that demand for social minorities appear in society, and they still are. And here, I highlight the vocation of community media to express and give visibility to the, so that's the third highlight, and to express and give visibility to the demands of social movements and minorities in the struggle for social justice. And last but not least, I highlight the vocation of community media for the appropriation of technology in communities. It was in the community media where many people had their first contact with information and communication technologies. First the radio, then the cassette, then television, and for what can also be with the internet, and then later internet, sorry. And if I rescue this brief history and these keywords, it is to remember what is in the genealogy of community media: the need for autonomy, the search for social justice, popular participation and democracy, the ability to express the demands of movements and minorities in authoritarian periods, and to be, like we are living right now in Brazil, and to be a space for community technological appropriation. These seem to be all essential elements to think about the role of community media and the challenges in the post-pandemic world where democracy is at risk, social movements are stifled, and the digital divide widens inequalities.
Obrigada.
Thank you. Maria Pia. Just a little bit logistical issue. Here we go. Thank you very much. I want to add to the intervention from Monica, absolutely, and also from our colleague in Mexico, and also from João Paulo. So we are all in the same phenomenon with differences in some countries, with conditions that are different in the development, but essentially we are talking about the same. I want to have four aspects, to underline four aspects. The model of the community radio, first, is always about the difference in a hegemony system, always with their editorial in their development. They show the difference of a social actor in the communication media, in media communication. They difference themselves in how, you know, they show the different voices, they do the editorial. So it's a very it's a type of communication that is hegemonic, that is homogeneous. So all the minorities, all the indigenous, that are not always talking by themselves. They can do it in a way or another in the community media. Also, the conversations, the discussions in the community media, they are more deep. They have power. They have key powers. It's a media that is more open from a small community or a big community. I think that this really make the community media from a notorious level, and all the difficulties they have in the development, they really amplify a public debate that really helps to improve and reinforce the democracy. And this I said because in general, these are themes that are really absent from our from our leaders. And I think that the place where there is the best debate is from the community media. They are, from their conditions, they don't have this profit, looking for profit, and they cannot, share an economic project without profit. They are going to develop a program that is different from the commercial, from the looking for profit. So I think the point on development, and we have to say thank you from the radios and from the community media for that. So I think the public debate with this difference from this characteristic that is different, they amplify the public, and they amplify also this, the development. This development that is different from looking for a profit. There is a few days we're looking at how the few themes to discuss. How are we going to look at the development of a third sector of communication? They are not looking only at the development of our states, but also is a sector with autonomy from the public sector. So that's what I wanted to say. Apologies, the last part was a little bit late a bit hard to translate. Alfonso, please. Thank you very much, Maria Pia. So, thank you very much. Now that we are live, I want to thank you again, all our friends that are organizers, as much in India, VINOD, and my friends, my Indian friends, Vasuki and Kanchan, and also my friends in Latin America, Claudia, and also Pepe and Matta from Chile, and also many that are connected, listening to us in the few minutes that I have in this first round. I want to do an affirmation is that the key role of the community media, and more specifically the community radio in Latin America, they have to keep on being a political role, and they are not always. And in this conversation, I would like to bring a critical vision of the role of the community media right now. And I think that there is still a problem that there is in the air from a very long time, is the problem of the definition of what is a community media. Many times we think of what it is, a community media, but after many decades of working, I still don't know what is a community media. I can smell it, I can see it when I'm there, but when they tell me, I don't always believe it. And that is why when I see us, when I say we, me and my team we organized in 2006 in Bolivia a conference. I'm going to share with you. Okay, to be honest, I don't know how to share actually. We did a book that is called a book that I will be unable to translate right now. And why we didn't want to call it a community radio. Is it the media? Is it the technology? Is it the participation of the people? And I think for me, the most important is the participation of the people. And what we're saying in this book is that the participation from the best experts at that time that were really involved in legal matters, in laws, we have still not reached a clear definition. And the example is Bolivia. Bolivia has a really wealthy history from the radio that are from the mines, with political coup and with a military phase, and the power that people were getting information from those mining radios. And so from there we then reach a time of populism, where it was created a new network called New Patri, and what they were doing only is to repeat the discourse from the leaders. They didn't have, like João said, autonomy and independencia. So when someone doesn't have autonomy, independence, they were not able to defend democracy and fight for democracy. And at first they call them community media. And that's why we have to have a critical vision. And so they had to add a discussion with the direction of these radios, telling them you are repeating what the main radio stations are saying. And so they changed the name, but still for a lot of people it is confusing. So we have to look at this in a critical way. And other extreme, I have a very beautiful experiences like I seen in India and Colombia. It's something I want to mention, please. From the voices of Magdalena, that movie. With my colleague, we visited 6 or 7 community radios that were really working in the middle of the war, in a very dangerous times, with FARC, with the narcos, and those were really an example of autonomy and independence. And I think that with this, I want to finish with this first intervention, putting in balancing these really extremes, these two extremes, whatever you want to call them, local radios or community radios. So the affirmation is radio, community radio that serve for our community. It has to be a political radio to take a decision. Thank you very much, Alfonso. Andrea. Thank you very much, Alfonso, and all of you. And so the idea now is to have an open space for discussion. I would like to do a first question how do you see the relationship between community media and the various conflicts, tensions, and problems that affect the Latin American region? And so now there is no order, no, Claudia? I think now it can be more spontaneous. I think Pepe asked to talk, and after María Pía. For me, Pepe and then María Pía. Yes, I can. So what I want to mention is a fact that is quite recent from a study that we did last year that was finalized at the beginning of this year, a study about the state of the indigenous radio in 19 countries in the world. And this study is going to be presented next Wednesday. So what I wanted to say is, so I had to review, the state of the community media, and more specifically the indigenous radio. And what I realized is that practically in all the countries, the community radios were one of the main action or fight was the opposition to projects. Almost all, actually all the countries, if it was not a tourism project or exploitation, agricultural exploitation, but we can say not only in Latin America, but also other countries, it is something that all the media, all the community radios share.
Gracias, Pepe. María Pía.
Thank you, Pepe. María Pía. What I want to say from what Alfonso was saying, principally the last part about the, what he was talking about, what happened in Bolivia, and all the work that he did with José, the AMARC representative. We all live this process in different ways, and this is really my personal opinion. There were a lot of ideas and proposals from the government to include some laws, but there was also a wish from the government, the Venezuela, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Bolivia, of Argentina, because they wanted to really have a hand on those community radio. And this was a complication in the past 7-8 years, because effectively, like was saying Alfonso, in this proposal of what is the community media, community radios, how they have to be autonomous, independent, is not always clear for everyone. And the editorial exercise is very complex. And so we understand that the community radios are not always from the left side, left political side.
Y a mí me parece que eso es un grave error. Yo creo que izquierda, derecha, del centro, lo que sea.
And so for me, that's a big problem that right, left, center, the community radio always have to be autonomous, the editorial autonomy and the participation in whatever. And this is, so I really thank the point from Alfonso, because really we are in the difficulties, especially in Latin America. I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but in Latin America, yes, it happened. Not only we are facing the difficulty that Mónica mentioned at the
por la persecución del régimen
beginning with Nicaragua. They had
Como
to
que
go
todavía
out because of the persecution
el
from
movimiento
the Ortega
comunitario
government.
tuvo una especie de
And some people
aletargamiento
is still not
recientemente.
clear in their heads.
Se comprometieron en excesivo con los gobernantes de turno, y eso yo lo digo así ampliamente, digamos. Creo que eso ocurrió.
So they really you know, got in hand with the government
Porque si los
too
medios
much. And I think it's really a theme to discuss and to know what are we going to do with this.
João,
Thank you, Pia. João, do you want to say something? Yes, thank you. I want to see that I really agree with what Alfonso said. Like political actors, for community media to be political actors, with all the different conflicts and tensions. I wanted to mention to highlight three current processes that seem to me to be the basis of the main problems facing Latin America today. First is the return of neoliberal policies and privatization of the common good. And second, the coups and democratic ruptures and the advance of the extreme right in the countries of the region, including Brazil. And third, the increase in social inequality and the return of poverty. These are three processes that are interconnected because we know that this return to neoliberal policies, even more savage than in the 90s, with deep attacks on the rights of workers, indigenous people, women, has rapidly led Latin American countries to poverty, has increased inequality, social and economic, and in addition to destroying nature and all the resources necessary for the common good. But the return of these policies was only possible due to the democratic breakdowns, since these neoliberal policies would not be approved in democratic elections. And these neoliberal policies can only be carried out by far-right governments that do not respect democratic processes and impede popular participation. And the case of Brazil is emblematic in this regard, since President Dilma Rousseff suffered an illegal impeachment in 2016. We have seen a swift and violent return to liberal policies that have taken away the rights guaranteed by our constitution for more than 30 years and destroyed the Amazonia and the sources of the common good in favor of monocultures and livestock. And it was this democratic breakdown that paved the way for neoconservatism and the rise of the far right that brought the current president to power. And we know that this democratic breakdown was only possible with the consent and support of the hegemonic media interested in neoliberal reforms. And where does the community media come from in this scenario? Precisely because of the scarcity and the little space they occupy. In the case of Brazil, the historical lack of incentive for community communication by the governments of the right and left, like Pia said, the lack of incentive for greater plurality and diversity in communication has favored a monolithic vision of social facts and has impeded a critical and in-depth discussion on a new project for a more just, egalitarian, and alternative society. Thank you very much, João. And now, Alfonso, please. Thank you. It's really stimulating to hear the colleagues because new ideas are coming up. And Pepe was talking about a new study that is finishing, and now is really to capture all the information from the new studies that are being done. And the practice, it's a project that was done by AMARC, and and a lot of people came together to do something together more than 20 years ago. First, we did a pre-selection of more than 100 community radios in all Latin America and Caribbean, and then 34, and then we did an analysis in deep and how are they sustainable, and how are, and we saw that it was not the economic reason. It was the social factor, the sustainability, social sustainability, the organizational sustainability, the also programmation that they had, and why it was not republished, because it's very important, this information. And within these studies that we did, we saw very absurd things. Not only now with like the government from in Brazil of Bolsonaro, far right, there were 8 million community radio waiting for a license. But at the same time, all the deputies and parliamentaries had their own radios. And it was an issue that was there even before. And what was Maria Pia saying about the autonomy, the guardianship can be very dangerous for democracy. And you know very well the story from the 22 radio from Mexico, and a very interesting story, because somehow they won, they conquered their independence to be able to work as autonomous radios. And here also I want to repeat, it's not important who gives the license, but the community really needs to appropriate, and I use this word appropriation. We have to do appropriation of the content of the political platform in which we develop the community radios, the media. And I think this allow appropriation of this political story, and this political information. It was invented, and it was imposed for many years. So the new generation, they don't have other ideas. They don't have the proper facts from 2004 until now. So this idea of the recuperation of the autonomy is very important. Thank you very much, Alfonso. And now, Monica. Thank you, Andrea. Not only in the community radios, but also at the public and commercial media. And I want to see how autonomy they have, how much autonomy they have, those, because they've become the speaker of the political government, and the public media, are they public or are they from the government? So the community media, I don't think it's exempted from that, from intimidation, intimidation. But the community media, in front of the conflicts and different issues, there's been projects to report those. I want to really underline community radio in Central America, or also in AMARC, Argentina also did those report processes, and also in Chile, to really take into account the social context, to really show the other face of the territories that have been affected by the war in Colombia, because there have been a massacre or a fact or an event, a tragedy, like Armero, like disappeared from the map by a volcano. So I think there's a big need to really narrate the conflict, narrate the territories from the perspective of the villagers, of the agent, change agent, and from the social movement. And it's not a garden of roses. There's always going to be a tension in the how people relate the stories. And that's why we talk about the right to communication, like a historic necessity from the villages, because we need to say what is happening in the streets. There are journalists that are very good, that are talking about what's happening in the social protest, and there are others that are very limited in the perspective. So projects like Media Ninja is that they are looking that anyone who can participate in a social protest with a mobile phone can say what is happening, and in a collaborative way they put it in the platform, and they can multiply the amount of stories in front of a repression, and also what means the social change. Like the corruption is a risk that all media has, but the community media is really moving forward with some report processes that has actually been copied by commercial and public media. They are talking about the reporter in the street, the person that reports, and they learned it from us, and they are trying to copy this idea, the value of report, of telling the story, democratic and pluralist, and from the voices of the people that are a part of this social change. Thank you very much, Monica, and all. So I'm going to read a commentary from Amparo in the chat, and then Claudia will do another question. This study that mentioned Alfonso, La Práctica Inspira, was a study very important that really brought some light in this moment, in its moment, and like it says, it's really important to review how today. Because it must have a lot of important things for today. It is a very good point to start. We can. Latin America is a region that was constantly going through crisis, political crisis,
territorial, es decir, desde dictadura,
natural crisis, dictatorships, wars, governments from extreme right, extreme left, coups, hurricanes, earthquakes, crisis. And now we are adding the COVID-19 crisis and the pandemic that we are living. How do you see the role of community?
Las diversas crisis.
Community communication in times of crisis that we have lived in the region, such as the one we face due to the pandemic. That would be very interesting to know your point of view. Who wants to start? João? Like I prepared, so yeah, I can be first. So what I would like to briefly reflect on one of the community. I would like to briefly reflect on what the community media could be collectively done, but then it's important to make a comparison. I believe that one of the main mistakes of governments around the world what we lived in Brazil, with the irresponsible negation and criminalization of the pandemic, and we could have avoided the death of 170,000 people, and especially in the favelas. And we have here in Rio de Janeiro, we have the case of the favela Mare. Favela is favela is favela. Is basically the township.
Levou informação de prevenção através da rádio, carteles, altavoz, WhatsApp. Isso é algo que para mim é importantíssimo. Temos que pensar que nós temos que ter acesso.
That was something that was very important for me. The community media, they have to have access to all the technology possible. Not only radio to really reach very high, but also all the cartels, and so I will add to what Monica said with positive examples facing the pandemic. But I would also like to briefly reflect on what the community media could have collectively done, and then it's important to make a comparison. I believe that one of the main mistakes of governments around the world, be it in Europe, Latin America, or North America, was the individual response to a global problem without borders. What we saw was that each country of the European Union closed borders to the countries of the bloc itself. The same with sister countries such as Argentina and Brazil in Mercosur, without coordinated action, each country acting selfishly and individually, either because of the response to the pandemic or because of the common problems that affect the world's poor. The progressive sectors of each country need to return to dialogue, act together, act in solidarity. That is why spaces like these are essential. But we also need to strengthen spaces such as the World Social Forum and our AMARC. For this, we need international organizations such as UNESCO and international cooperation to support joint actions between organizations and between countries. Unfortunately, it seems to me that the pandemic is only the first of many global crises and problems, and we must appreciate the potential that community media and community media organizations locally coordinated way to global problems.
Muchas gracias, obrigado, João. ¿Quisiera alguien más de nuestros panelistas responder o comentar algo en relación con este papel de la comunicación comunitaria en situaciones de crisis en nuestra
theme, the role of the community media in the situation of crisis?
Yo quiero simplemente hacer un apunte. Me estoy reservando parte importante.
According to my notes,
tecnologías, pero
I'm
quiero decir que el concepto,
a very important part for when we are going to talk about technology. But I want to say the concept of community has changed, and we have to have this very clear, and even more in this time of pandemic. How was the community radio before? Like the mining radio, there was, the place where the radio was working, and there was a line of people, of 20, 30 people that wanted to enter and take the mic to talk their voice, to talk their facts, and that has been lost and was lost even before the pandemic, and even more with the pandemic. So there's can be differences, but this lack of proximity that is really affecting us. It's really nice to see all of you in small squares, but I cannot hug you, and for me this is very important. This proximity, the physical proximity that there was with the community, and this is something that unfortunately has been lost. And the governments that have had the hegemony of the facts during the pandemic has done campaigns. Me, I'm an enemy of the campaigns, and they've done, propaganda campaigns about information. They repeat the same, the TV, the radio, full of messages, when they could, instead of doing that, work with the community media. And I'm remembering the book written by Canadians. I cannot remember the title, that they were doing a comparison. It's called Beyond. Okay, after I will give you the title. I cannot remember. They were doing a comparison in Brazil, in South Africa, about how the communication with AIDS and how it was managed with the AIDS communication with HIV. They had more or less the same amount of population, more or less the same amount of cases at the time, and the same revenue per capita. So they had a lot of things they common at that time, so they could compare. And in South Africa, they had really invested a lot of millions in campaigns of radio campaigns. And Brazil at this time, they had decided to work at the community level with community media, and they had done in 5 or 6 years, they had managed to control much better than compared to South Africa the HIV issue. So in this pandemic, which is a different type, of course, for which there is no vaccine, just like HIV. And so in the same way, the same way that the government could also support the community media, they didn't do it. Because why? Because it's processes. And why? Because leaders don't think in processes, they think in messages, and what can be done in the long run. So what I want to say is the concept of community has changed. And then I will intervene in the question of technology. Thank you, Alfonso. I don't know if Maria Pia or Monica or Pepe want to say something. Monica, go ahead. Well, sorry. I feel that the community radio media in Colombia, Latin America, they communicate during the crisis. Unfortunately, our democracies, they are very fragile and even sometimes inexistent. And so it's really insist and persist in the communication of what is public, of what is collective in the common good, how João also said it. Really, this necessity, urgent necessity, but really it really implies to be always there. And in times of pandemic, where they have adopted, very extreme ways, they are very, are much important, and the possibility of vulnerability is very imminent now. In Nicaragua, they passed 3 legislations, and one is talking about, death penalty in hateful discourse, hateful hate speech. When something happens in Venezuela, they talk, but when something happens in Nicaragua that is that bad, like happened in Nicaragua, no one talks about it. In another way, I think we also have to be the umbrella of, social change in the consumption. And I think this really means how we eat, what is our consumption, production. Also in the community radios, we can talk, for example, fruits that can be easily reached, but in the media, that are talking about food that is really poison that come from the industry. So I think we need to take to the community media the public debate of health and alimentation, food, and also of gender issues, because it was this pandemic also brought a lot of light the issues of children and women. And also we also talk now it's a bit hard because we have to talk with a mask, that also doesn't become like a way to silence people, and a theme of the mistrust and facing fear, and that doesn't have to stop us to continue becoming a community and to be together even more now. Thank you, Monica. I really agree with you. María, I think that the experience here in Chile is that the first that I can see with the pandemic is the inequality, the social differences in Chile. To talk about Santiago, the first municipalities that have entered in quarantine in Santiago was the ones with least revenues. The radios, actually, sorry, the highest revenues, and they're all transmitting. All the journalists from like very high radios, they were transmitting from home, and they had all the technology. And the community radios, they are from the studio because they couldn't get there. So install and try to find pen drives with internet so that everyone who belonged to the radio station could do the radio from home. So and so it was very complicated, all the possibilities, and it took us 2 months to put this community radio to be back alive from home, because they don't have easily access to internet, and technology is very fragile, and they pay a lot of money for internet that is very basic. So we took a very long time because they didn't have the conditions, and people couldn't go and pay for internet because they also all losing their jobs. So now the community radios in Santiago, where I am, what they did is they did campaigns. People are really going through hunger, so they really did a lot of campaigns for places where they could get food, open kitchens, and those were campaigns. And so there's a radio that is called Radio Franklin, and they were coming together, and they were going in that kitchen, open kitchen, and they were really advertising all of those open kitchens for people that were going through hunger, and how to get all the food, do the food, and then transmit live from the radio. So complete, very complex, but we ended up doing it. But they had a lot of difficulties, and I think, and I also saw that with the new technologies, the grand media, they were used to transmitting with waves, satellite waves.
O sea, ya tuvieron que dejar la delicadeza del agua.
They had to to start really transmit through Zoom and WhatsApp, because they couldn't, and also because they had a very big economic crisis also. And so, and the state, like Monica and Alfonso said, they're doing their campaigns, but they don't take into account the community media. And when they take into account, it's free. So why are you going to pay them? And when we don't take into account the community media, when we can do it in the villages, in the territories, I think there is a lot of lesson learned from this. I think it really showed a lot of things, a lot of social distancing, to be close in a building, in your home, without seeing people only through the screen. I think it's really a big experiences. I think there's a lot to talk about, and I think the community media, I think they really have to say, and I think the practices are a lot. I think they've done a lot of them do really incredible things for their communities and try to move forward. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much, Maria Pia, and what Maria Pia said about the internet and the access to internet. And this really leads us to the last question. After that, we'll have an open Q&A session. What is the
y los medios digitales. María Pía ya empezó a hablar sobre eso de forma...
I'm going to tell you the question right now. What is the relevance of community media in the age of digitalization and digital media? Pepe, go ahead. So, I want to comment on this. The role of these new technologies, in my opinion, what they are doing is to really give a lot of potential to these radios that now allows.
No podemos escuchar.
I think we're having some logistical issues with Pepe. Some connection issues, I think. Definitely think this is not for me because I see everyone else moving. Okay, that's a shame. Okay, it's frozen. If someone else wants to intervene, and then when the connection comes back, he will finish what he had to say. Alfonso, go ahead. Thank you. I think that the theme of digitization is fundamental in the changes that it had created in the community media. And even before the pandemic,
pesimista,
I have a vision that is 90%,
pero al mismo tiempo
90% negative and 10% optimistic. At the same time, I'm also conscious, aware that there is no other, and it's going to be a deepened. I'm not really I'm not really worried about this access to internet, because I know there is a lot of projects like from bigger companies like Facebook, Google, that in 2 or 3 years they are going to put 600 satellites, and there's going to be free signal in all the world, because for them it's in their own interest. But in a way, we are all going to be able to, if the internet is weak, and now Pepe Ramos is frozen, I don't think in 2 or 3 years this will still exist. What I want to say is what I was saying before is that it really changed the concept of community. The community is not local anymore. This is a community, and we are in 4 or 5 different continents. But it's a community that we are, that we have created. Community now are communities of interest. They are not from like a community, village communities. They also exist, but now We also have the, the communities that are bigger, that are meet because of interest, which is also a risk because we also have similar, similar discourses, similar opinions, which is also a risk because there is no different opinions. The digitization, it's a knife that has two sides. It can be to cut vegetables and also to kill someone. There is, it has to do with control, with the lack of participation, lack of appropriation. And with Amparo, we did the tour of the Magdalena media, and we really met a lot of radios for peace, a lot of participation from youth. And we visited one of these radios, Simiti. It was managed by only one person, that is managed by someone called Fidel Castro. That's why I really remember. And this person is really good person, by the way. And the bad way of digitization is that he was, programming 6 hours of music and other programs, and then he would finish and close and go and buy and play football. And this is really a loss in the side of participation and appropriation. But at the same time, he was really welcoming the program of a professor, and they were doing a program. They were putting together a collective together,
¿no? O jóvenes en la radio comunitaria de Gamarra también.
And they had a program from kids to kids.
Entonces,
and that is the positive side. And so I think there is the creativity from people that is very important. What was happening in Cuba until last time I went, when there was no good internet, they invented the packet, like we can say, which is a USB key, and you subscribe, and then every week you're going home with like movies and different type of information. And it's illegal by the state, but it was tolerated. And in that USB key, there are the information, movies, music, and things that they couldn't reach because the internet was still very expensive. Now it's better, but for the salaries that are in Cuba, it was not accessible to most people. And so we have to see these two sides, the initiative, the community initiative, the personal initiative to solve a problem, and the part of the control, the verticality that leads to a hegemonic discourse and maybe relating fake news, like Trump in the US, and actually convinces a lot of people in the US. It's incredible that Washington Post related so many lies from the ex-president Trump, and that a lot of people believe them. So to come back in the digitization, and I think this is the last question that is going to be asked: what are we going to do in front of this? We have to strengthen this community feeling, not only to be, to show, to put on air music and different programs, but the new technologies, the community media, they have to recuperate the participation of appropriation. A community of communicators like us, or a community of villagers. A last experience that I want to mention, that I visited in the south of India, the foundation Visuana, they put centers of knowledge, community knowledge, in during a time where there was no mobile phones, no computers. In those centers of community knowledge, village knowledge centers in India, the people could go there and know what is, you know, the weather for the next few days, the price of the fish in the market next door, or where there is a vet for their cow. We have to recuperate what is relevant for a community, or a local community, or a community of interest. So I think that's how goes my idea. Thank you, Alfonso. And now we have José Manuel Ramos back. Sorry. I came out of the session. Sorry. I want just to say that yes, the technologies have the possibility to do synergies that are very interesting, and they allow for example, community radios to do radio without necessarily in the radio, but even outside. And there is also a lot of people that can participate actively producing content. And now practically in community radio can transmit content in anywhere in the world. So what I wanted to underline is that yes, there is against in technology, for the technology, there is this vision of a potential, you know, a bit negative. For the community radio, it really allows them to give a lot of potential to the action and really increase the participation and have a more intense participation. I really agree with Alfonso with this other idea of community that is not only local, but that is also more of interest also. Thank you very much, José Manuel. Monica, you wanted to say something? Yes, of course. I had to send this question to a lot of colleagues from AMARC, and Carlos Amorado responded. He's responsible from AMARC in Honduras. And the community radio in Central America, there are ways of hope. The community radio in Central America, they really fight for the different events, facts, and they have also, there is this balance between analogic and also this new podcast way of doing things, and we are it's how the time is not only you know, live or analogy. A lot of community media, they are really putting together a lot of content that can be listened by people that have data on their phone, but they're in the rural areas where and I'm very you know I think differently from Alfonso. I agree with Alfonso that we are also a community, that we are all the same. We are the same in how we dream, we love, and we think, and that is also really you know, is different from the technologies, because we continue to be stories. And in this sense, I want also to bring I want to say the slogan of without history there is no camera, and it's a school in Colombia that says that is their slogan. And before the community, there is the stories, and in Latin America, you know, you lift a stone and there is a story. And to tell those stories on how we exist in our countries, not only the revendications in front of facing the power, but also the power of the local, of those communities. I think that we would already be contributing a lot in the world. The radios, they really recuperate the local stories with those resistances, and the story about how they have survived, of how those communities have survived in the middle of the pandemic, and still serving the hot bread when people were looking for it. Sorry, it was a little bit hard to translate the part where she was reading from a colleague. Apologies for that. Thank you, Monica. And now the questions and response, the Q&A from the audience, and Claudia is going to translate into Spanish. So we have three questions. So I hope that I can find them.
Okay, I'll try and copy paste these questions in the order in which.
Okay, I'm sorry, somebody has the mic on and you need to. Yeah, okay. Entonces, dos preguntas son para todas y todos y una pregunta es específica.
So two questions are for everyone, and then there is specific questions for Maria Pia and Monica. From Kusek, how apologies, I'm trying to find the question. The panelists talk about the
la visión más amplia de los medios comunitarios como agentes para inventar un mundo donde hay muchos mundos. Por un lado, veo la necesidad.
On one side, I can see the need to defend the local, and in the other way, the need to eliminate the bordars and the limits that really divide the communities and the people in the world in national lines, and also ethnically. That is really the birth of a lot of conflicts. How can the community radio media can have an opinion in those two extremes? The second question from Vasuki. Okay, so the first question is how can community media bridge the local with the transnational? And the last question from Kanchan. My question is for Maria Pia and Monica. The AMARC gender policy was ratified in the global meeting of De La Plata that AMARC had when Maria Pia was the president. Among Monica and Maria, if you could give us an idea of how far you feel it has been adopted by countries who are members of AMARC, and especially countries in Latin America, more specifically that gender policy. And before you go ahead with your responses, I'm going to read a message from Amparo that says, so I am going, apologies, a few seconds. I would like to make a contribution on the subject under discussion on technological processes and their impact on community media, in particular digitization. I speak from Colombia. What I see is that these processes have occurred in a manner comparable to what they're equipping, so their material, training, and struggling process have been for their existence and incidence in their communities. Following Jesus Martin Barbero on how we should see technology, I want to raise not only its use and the aspects that are more easily seen, but also the way it has affected thinking, the conception of its work, programming, themes, formats, narratives, stories,
y de sus alcances en sus comunidades especialmente en niñas, niños, jóvenes y el papel con los adultos. Yo creo que estos procesos de apropiación por parte de los medios comunitarios, de los nuevos formatos tecnológicos y de la innovación y creatividad que han suscitado son fascinantes. Sin duda,
and activity that they have aroused are fascinating. There have certainly been problems and difficulties. I will give the word to the panelists. And so now, please go ahead and give your responses. Apologies for the tough translation of the question. Regarding the connection with local, transnational, I wanted to say with what Monica was talking about, the importance to tell the stories, to tell the local stories. Myself at the university, I am really teaching radio, and we're talking about now commercial radio and radio in general. They have a lot of competition. Sorry, I know competition is now global. And commercial radio, they have to be in web radio, they have to do podcasts. And so with these listeners that are potentially global, and how does the competition do and how to do something different? And the response from expert is that we have to talk about local. And so this connection from the transnational going to telling the local stories, that's the response on how to be different. And so we understand that when there are problems that are common exploitations, one of the ways to connect is more and more and to look at the community and a community, like Alfonso said, a community with another definition. But for me, the possibility is to have this connection, this transnational connection, and to look at the local stories. And so the other question, I don't know if I understood well, but how to keep the volunteers. I want to change a little bit the question. We have to fight for laws that allow us that for people that work in the radios have to be paid. And it's something that Pierre told me once, and I've never forgotten. I did a study with 100 community radio in Brazil, and there were 30 questions, and one was about the gender equality in community radio. And like I was believing, there is a big inequality, and we have very few men in terms of cleaning the radio and create more of all the mechanic things. And when we look at the directors, they're all men. And I remember Pierre saying one of the reasons why there is not very few women is because there is no sustainability, economic sustainability, because women, they have 2 or 3 daily works, and they have home and work. And so how can you ask women to work in the radio voluntarily and without being paid? And so we have to fight for the change. In Brazil, for example, it's forbidden the publicity. And so we have a lot of radios that don't have resources, and they're going to church, they're going to the local politician. So one way to maintain the autonomy is to guarantee the sustainability, the financial stability of those radios.
Gracias, João. Sí, Mónica, adelante.
Thank you, João. Here, yes, Monica, go ahead. I am going to continue because I want to continue on what João said, also to articulate to the theme of pandemic. The thing of volunteering has always been a vocation of the activism, and the communication processes. But yes, we have to fight for the rights in general. We also have to fight for the workers' rights of our people. I want to say that we have had a few cases of COVID-19 in some of the AMARC representatives in Nicaragua, Panama, Guatemala, and we saw that they didn't have any access to health, and they had a need to ask for contribution and support, voluntary support to finance their health, because in those countries, in very few countries of Latin America, there is no free access to health. So it's an alert. It's that pandemic brought to us, that we knew, that a lot of the community radio, especially in Bolivia, a lot of representatives of the radios, they help to inform, but also expose themselves a lot. So I think, like João said, we need to generate conditions, worker condition, and also to do with the sustainability of those community media, that their objectives is not to profit, but also need conditions of dignity. And another way, in the theme of regarding the question, looking at the local versus global, if I was starting to answer, there are three ways to create this bridge between global and transnational. I really insist to tell the local stories that really illustrate the really important themes like climate change, fight for the land, the really what is epic in the community, and it's also anonymous and it's silent. So we need to really put a focus on those stories, but also in the stories with also to be auto criticism. I also agreed on what Gumucio said, and also to tell stories with learning where the community has not worked, and also to generate learning, especially in this time, where to generate a political culture in our countries. And in another way, we also have to make visible and also soundful, can be heard also, the communities to be just and fair. And third, we also need to be very creative to generate dialogues, mixed dialogues between, for example, leaders, popular leaders, community leaders, indigenous leaders, and also colleagues from different also communities. There is, for example, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, there is generate university and also scientific projects. They have to be put in dialogue and be shown. The dialogue between the knowledge, local knowledge, popular knowledge, and the scientific knowledge could be very have this bridge between the transnational and local. And also looking at the gender concept, gender issues in AMARC, like Kanchan was mentioning. In the 10th Assembly of AMARC, we adopted a policy, a gender policy that was approved by the Assembly. And regarding this, I want to say, and the country that has been the most rigorous, and that can be an example in the adoption of this policy, gender policy, but also in the study and monitoring in Latin America, is AMARC Mexico. women network of AMARC in Mexico. They generate a tool to inspire this work for equality. There's a few things they've done. One is that they did a monitoring of the of why they created the Women's Network at the international level and Latin America level. We continue having representative in the regional committee, and also in the research for social structure of the radios and collectives that organize the radios these days. We also talked about balance in the assembly and the different tables, work tables, work plan workshops. AMARC, Argentina, Uruguay, they did quite well, and in Central America, they are not yet equality, but there is representatives from women and also LGBTI groups that are also participating. And also it has been part of the processes of participation in the programs and the productions, radio programs. For a better illustration, I left a link, but I think you can really look at it. Gender policy, AMARC, Mexico. And what I want to say to finalize is that we realize we did a generational change with the neo-feminism, with the young people, feminists that really came into the streets to protest, especially regarding the abortion, safe abortion, like as a public policy. And in this sense, this really animated a lot the community discussion, and even created some conferences in Argentina to create an agenda, not only to have the focus on gender, but also to have a communication, a feminist communication, and to bring some political in this. So let's left a link, and you can really review the different feminist congress and managed by a representative from AMARC Argentina, And Kanchan has already shared in the chat, so it's already available in the chat. Alfonso, you asked to talk, go ahead. So in the first question, how can we understand, how can we create bridges between transnational and local? One learns from the reality. Once I was in Burkina Faso, where there was a radio that was community. When I entered, I was surprised because it was a very big building with 3 studios, and I couldn't see they were producing anything. But the producer, the manager, was very proud. They had all the AM, FM waves, and he was very proud to show me letters that they're receiving from Denmark and many other places in the world. And so he was adapting his programs so that they could hear him in France, in Switzerland, and he was not worried about the community in Burkina Faso. And so I think João is very right when he was saying first there is a community, and I would even say even more that first there is the community interest. And when we talk about them, we don't always about a community that is localized geographically. We talk about a community that have interests that want to share with other communities, because that is also very important. It's not how do we reach the rest of the world, but how do we talk with the rest of the world? Because if there is no dialogue, then there is a type of monologue. My community does this and my community is that. No, we have to create this link with other community or a community that they call transnational, a community in other part of the world, not necessarily, not only people that are going to listen, but also people that we can dialogue with. And so in a community, it happens this, but we want to talk with you about this, and we have to have a dialogue. If there is no dialogue, then it's a dialogue of deaf people.
O sea, de intereses, van por delante siempre que haya las dos vías.
Always move forward. In the second question about how to maintain the volunteers, we have to come back in the practice. The study that was done, this research that was done, we have to read it. We had a questionnaire of so many questions, and how the community radio continued to be sustainable. And we visited radios in Salvador with Oscar Perez, where the community radio was financed by the braid maker, the dentist. And so there were many ways, but I want the basic, and I think Monica also said it, the basic is the voluntary participation of people. When someone said voluntary participation, I'm talking about the community as a whole. I remember one time in Philippines, they really didn't have a single, cent or even support from anyone. And what were they doing? They were invited the teacher from the village so that they could have a weekly program, or the person in charge of the health center so that they could have a weekly program, or youth so that they could have the program on music or sexuality. And so they were doing the research and they were doing the program. So to really not to have 5 volunteers that work all the time in the community media. How do we pay them? How do we finance them? But I'm very pessimist regarding the neoliberal government, but also with the government populist and neo-populist, because it's also not interesting to them either. And so is in another book that I mentioned, that I sent, is politics and laws in Latin America, and they could be very policies that are very important. But also, what the difference is what happens in the
la tapa, ¿verdad?
In reality also.
Entonces, para terminar con esto,
what's really important. That on her screen in Spanish, and so different.
De nuestro compromiso político. Yo creo que el 80% de las cosas que yo he hecho
no ha sido por still exists because it's a commitment. Sorry. 80% of the things I've done in my life have not been for money. I've done things because I like them and where I was learning, and this really wish to learn is really it's a motivation for volunteers. If they don't want to participate, if young people don't want to participate, then it's a problem. We cannot force them. We cannot force any community to participate. The participation always has to be voluntary. No one can force us. If there is no participation, then this community media then is not useful to the community. Then we have to be clear. If a community radio is not sustainable with the social sustainable, with the support from their own community, like Burkina Faso, another small radio. You know, people will put together the petrol for that community radio. And so the programming is not pertinent for the community. So the fundamental of voluntarism has to be with the function of what community media is, and it has to be for the interest of their own community. Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you very much. And now the last responses from José, Manuel, and Maria Pia, and then we'll have to say bye. So just quickly, because the time is over, but I want to underline a sentence that João said regarding the first question, that solutions and actions in the local, in front of global problematics. And I think this really brings us to a lot of thinking. How do we reinterpret or interpret the problematics that are global, that are transnational, from the local point of view, and to make visible these responses, these local responses. In the second question, I really agree. I think we have to differentiate the participation, you know, that has to be voluntary, and you know, put in place the content for the radio, etc. But also the cycle. This is a few people that take care of the media, and I think I agree with what that has been said, is to find ways to make sure that this work is recognized and paid, and that doesn't take away all the other work that is voluntary, which I will put it more in the field of participation. And because we are going to say bye, it has been a pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation. And it was really a pleasure to listen to all of you. And I think it's very important to continue with those themes. And I hope we can see a comment from a colleague in Mexico, Renan, that says that how, you know, all of a sudden everyone is the definition of community radio, how it works, and then there is confusion. And he's talking about how he went to an event that was, you know, talking about their own community radio and how they had a community radio and how it was a bit absurd. So I wish you all the best, and we have to move forward in this fight. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, José Manuel. And now Maria Pia, please. Thank you. I wanted to refer to this idea of community of interest and community, territorial community. What I've seen in the community radio, there is always these two possibilities. Radio Earth is a radio of interest because it's a radio of women. It's not a territory. And from colleagues that were from radios that were more from territory, they had a hard time understanding this Radio Earth that was more about women. And the territory radios, they are starting to now expand their programming and becoming more about of interest, you know, health and rights and other interests. So I think that the bridges between the local and the transnational or the global, to say it in some way, it exists. And I think this seminar and other meetings, they really bring us experiences and how local experiences take those experiences and really applies them transnationally. In the community of Santiago, the reality is that they take a lot the local from the local towns, and we take this experience to look further, to take out of the town and to go more of a level of interest in Latin America and global. And I think it's very important for radios to be sustainable. Regarding the policy, what is community? I think the fight will always be there, and I think the laws, and I believe the same as Alfonso, to always to be there. We are not going to stop, insist, and doing it. To have the right to advertisement, to have the right to go live at whatever times they want. They don't solve the issue, and the fight is there every day. What is a community? What is for profit? What does it mean to be a volunteer? It's a fight that is every day.
No significa hacernos los con los problemas que tiene esto. Por ejemplo,
for example, the transmission from any program on Facebook Live, and you are taking the risk because the music that you are using is not respecting the rights of the author of the music. So you are taking the risk that they're taking it down from you. They're taking it down from Facebook Live, sorry. So
efectivamente, ¿en qué minuto vamos a llegar a que los privados digan vamos a poner 4 platos?
What time are we going to reach? I think it's true that we are going to maybe reach this time where internet is free and available for everyone. But I think the right to internet and to have the right to internet and freely, I think it's fundamental. I think the fight for the frequency that we had a few years ago, I don't think there is a lot of sense these days.
Más complejos, con más pobreza, son importantes, pero hoy día la verdad es que la pelea por la frecuencia ya no es la que fue.
I think today the fight for frequency is not the same as it was. And the response from Monica in terms of the gender, I think is very complete. And I want to say that this administration, AMARC, has to continue insisting with the gender policy in the programming of radios and direction. Management of radios is very poor. The presence of women and the management is too many men, and so it has an impact on the production too. I think it is something.
Aparece en radio todos los días.
Something that has to still be there for all the community radios. A lot of community radios came out, and all of them were from leaders that were men.
Seguir prestando la atención. Eso es lo que yo podría decir. Muchas gracias.
It's something that we still have to bring attention to. Thank you very much.
Perdón.
Andrea, your mic.
Muchas gracias, María Pía.
Thank you very much, Maria Pia. I really agree with you, and that's why I even forgot about the mic. It was really a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you very much from the chair of UNESCO of Community Media and colleagues from the University of Hyderabad, Kanchan, Vasuki, and all the panelists to share the ideas and the knowledge and experiences, and all the people that are participating and attending. And until next time, thank you. This is Claudia. I really want to repeat the thank you from Andrea. Thank you, VINOD, for the invitation and for this space. Thank you, Maria, Pia, Monica, João, Alfonso, y Pepe. And to finish this session, VINOD has a message for all of us. Thank you to all of you.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute or two to thank people. Also, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So thanks for all the panelists, each of our panelists, for making this discussion what we had expected it to be. There was a good reason why we had the Latin American dialogue as a finale for the global dialogues. I mean, the intellectual passion, the political commitment, the intensity of activism that each of you bring to this dialogue is exactly what we had expected. A Latin American friend was joking before the dialogue, I don't think 2 hours are going to be enough when you put a room full of Latin Americans to talk about community media. And I'm sure you could have gone on for much longer. But thanks a lot for being here and making this an exciting discussion. Thanks to Claudia and Andrea for taking on this task so bravely and so readily. And of course, Clementina Sanchez for making this all Spanish Portugal discussion possible, and for us to follow the dialogue. Clementina is a really fantastic translator and interpreter. Thanks a lot, Clementina. As I was saying, this is also the finale of the dialogues that we started about 5 months ago in June. I mean, we spent 2-3 months getting depressed about the pandemic and the lockdown and the social distancing and all of that, and decided within the chair that we need to create some bridges and launch some kind of a dialogue, have a conversation with people across the world to learn what they are doing, to share experiences and so on. I just want to take a minute to thank a bunch of networks and organizations that have made this possible. If I start mentioning the individuals, we'll be here till tomorrow morning. To begin with, UNESCO New Delhi, Ezekiel Dlamini and Ashita Singh at the UNESCO South Asia office in New Delhi really made this possible with their support. UNESCO Southern Africa, where my friend Alamin Yusuf is now posted, his support. Community Media Forum of Europe with Bridget Jallo. AMARC Asia Pacific, AMARC Europe with my friend Michael Nicolai. The Farm Radio International in Canada with Ian Pringle and Sebastian Negre. Foundation Hirondelle. Cameroon Community Media Network. Community Network of Sierra Leone. Community Broadcasting Association of Australia. Community Media Association of UK. National Campus and Community Radio Association of Canada. Zimbabwe Association of Community Radios. My friend Pete Tradish at International Media Action in Philadelphia. National Federation of Community Broadcasters. I'm sure I'm missing a few more organizations and networks, but these are some of the central players that extended their support, introduced us to a lot of interesting activists and practitioners to make this happen. About 75 panelists and moderators over the last 5 months. And I still don't have a count on how many people participated as audience on all the different platforms. Thanks, everyone. Each of these dialogues are being transcribed to begin with in English, and we'll see if UNESCO lends support for translation into at least French and Spanish. And this will be shared. Each of these dialogues has also been recorded and posted on a YouTube platform of the UNESCO chair. This one will be posted in a day or two as well. So please take a look when you have time, circulate and distribute in your own networks. And from the UNESCO chair team, Kanchan, Vasuki, Pranay, and our doctoral scholars, Anirudh, Hazina, Annapurna, Sriju, EJ, many of whom have taken on the job of transcribing each of these dialogues very efficiently, very effectively. So from the side of the chair, we hope to stay connected with all of you in the coming months and years, and hopefully continue to learn from each other through dialogues like this. Thank you, and good night from India. Thanks, everyone.